In recent years, Sylvia Henry has experienced deep and profound loss. Her husband's death shortly before Christmas several years ago overwhelmed Mrs. Henry with loneliness and grief. Then, a devastating wildfire swept through her neighborhood, leaving a trail of smoldering ash and debris where homes once stood, including Mrs. Henry's. When the evacuation order came, she only had time to grab a picture of her and her late husband and a box of documents. During the many long months of rebuilding her life and her home, Mrs. Henry had many opportunities to reflect that her identity was safe and secure as a child of God. Where there was once a pile of ashes, a beautiful new home stands as a testimony to God's faithfulness. As a piano teacher, Mrs. Henry has a special place in her heart for children and their education. Her heart was touched as she learned of children in developing countries living in dire poverty and unable to attend school. When she heard about the child sponsorship program through Nazarene Compassionate Ministries, she felt like she had found a partner to help her reach the children God had placed upon her heart. Through this wonderful program, Mrs. Henry is currently helping 32 children attend school and receive an education that will give them a chance for a bright future. During a recent trip to Africa, Mrs. Henry was able to meet several of her children to tell them personally how much God loves them, how much she loves them, and how important their education is. The children were so grateful to meet someone who cared so deeply about them, and Mrs. Henry's heart was touched by the welcome she received. Mrs. Henry has implemented an estate plan that will contribute much of her estate, including her new home that God so wonderfully supplied, to create an endowment that will provide for over 100 children every year in the neediest areas of the world through Nazarene Compassionate Ministries. The Church of the Nazarene Foundation will administer this endowment on behalf of Mrs. Henry and is pleased to help her fulfill this dream that God has placed on her heart.